Delia Marsh found the auction notice at 4 in the morning, buried under 3 months of mail she had been too tired to face. She was sitting at her sister's kitchen table in Marrow, Tennessee, where she had been living for 63 days. The invitation had been for 2 weeks. The overhead light buzzed at the same frequency it had buzzed since she and Renee were children growing up in this house. And she had stopped noticing the sound the way she had stopped noticing the smell of Carl's cigarettes, and the way he looked at her, with a particular kind of patience that was not patience at all, but its opposite, dressed carefully enough to pass. He never said anything unkind. He had learned, in the weeks since she arrived, that he did not have to. By the end of this story, I'm also going to share something special with those of you who stick around to the end, something that can help you in your personal life. But first, let's get back to. Her mug of instant coffee sat cooling beside the mailbox. Outside the kitchen window, the sky was black and the temperature had dropped to 38 degrees. She had been awake since 2. In the living room, her son Owen slept on the couch. He was 10 years old, and the couch had springs that made a sound like old wood settling every time he shifted. And for the 2 hours before she gave up on sleep, she had been lying on the floor beside it, her hand near his arm, listening to that sound and running numbers in her head that had not come out right once in 16 months of trying. Her daughter Cass slept on a pallet in the corner of Renee's daughter's room, a corner granted with the specific, grudging precision of a 12-year-old who understood, without being told, that this arrangement was wrong in ways she couldn't name. Cass was 6. She had brought her stuffed rabbit, a gray cotton thing called Button, and that rabbit had been in her arms every night for 16 months, since the evening Delia packed them both into the Hyundai in the parking lot of the Whitfield Road apartment complex and drove away from the only home Cass had ever known. Button had grown grayer with the months. His left ear was held on by a safety pin. Cass had not asked for another rabbit. She had not asked for a lot of things, and Delia was still deciding whether that was resilience or something more troubling. The laundry room was where Delia slept. It was off the kitchen, just wide enough for the cot and the small dresser that Renee had moved in from the garage, and it smelled of fabric softener and the particular dusty warmth of the dryer's exhaust vent. She had been grateful for it. She was still grateful for it. But gratitude had a weight to it when it lasted long enough, a physical heaviness that sat in the chest and did not go away, and 63 days was a long time to carry it. She had $319 in her bank account, not $319 and change. Exactly $319, because she had gone to the ATM 2 days before and taken out a single dollar, so the rounded figure would stop haunting her in the night arithmetic. $319 was what stood between her children and the thing that came after the thing that came next, which she could feel the shape of without being able to name it precisely. It was the shape of what happened when even the last options ran out. The cardboard box of mail had been in the back seat of the Hyundai for months, then in the trunk, then carried into the laundry room when she arrived at Renee's. She had been unable to open it in the same way she was unable to look directly at certain things. But it was 4 in the morning and the numbers in her head were getting worse with repetition rather than better, so she brought the box to the kitchen table and started working through it. The past due water bill was addressed to the house and had Renee's name on it. She set it aside without opening it. A credit card offer already 2 months outdated. A notice from the county school district about Owen's enrollment documentation, which she had since resolved. A Christmas card from her mother, postmarked in December, that said thinking of you, love Mom, and nothing else, which was the most and least her mother had ever been able to offer. A rummage sale flyer from a church 3 towns over. And at the bottom of the box, printed on goldenrod paper the color of old mustard, a Cocke County notice. Public land auction, March 14th, 9 a.m. County Courthouse, Newport. Parcel 44 to 811, 14. 6 acres, Greer's Hollow Road, unincorporated Cocke County. Structure on property. Cabin, condemned 2011. No utilities. Sold ASES, no warranty. Starting bid, $300. She read it 3 times. $300. 14 acres and a condemned building for $300, which was $19 less than she had. She set the mug down on top of the notice to hold it flat against the table and pulled out her phone and went to the county property records website, which loaded slowly on her data plan. Parcel 44 to 811. The map loaded. She could see the shape of the land, a rough polygon in the foothills south of a named hollow, bounded by a creek on one side and a fire road on another. The satellite image showed trees and a clearing and, at the center of the clearing, a dark rectangular form. The owner of record was listed as Mabel Corwin, deceased. The parcel had reverted to the county 3 years prior. She searched for Mabel Corwin. Newport Plain Talk obituary, 3 years old, 3 paragraphs. Mabel Ruth Corwin, 81, of Greer's Hollow. Born 1941, Sevier County. Never married. Retired from the textile mill in 1996. Described as someone who kept to herself and kept a garden. Survived by no immediate family. Services private. That was the whole of the public record. Delia sat with the notice long enough for the kitchen windows to go from black to gray. Then Owen shifted on the couch in the other room. That sound of springs. Confessing, and she folded the notice and put it in the pocket of her sweatshirt. She had been losing ground for 16 months. That was the truest way to put it. Not falling apart, not collapsing, just losing ground steadily in the way that happened when things went wrong in sequence, each one arriving before you had recovered from the one before it. The job went first. She had been a records administrator at Valley Medical Center for 8 years, a position she had taken at 26 and stayed in because the work suited her and the income was reliable and the health benefits were good enough that she stopped comparing them to other options. $47,200 a year. Insurance for the family with a reasonable deductible. A small retirement account she thought of as a problem for future Delia to solve. In October of the year before last, the hospital announced it was transitioning all records management to a centralized digital platform operated by a company based in Atlanta. The decision had been made internally 18 months before the announcement, she later learned. Her department of 11 people was being eliminated. 60 days notice and 6 weeks severance. Her supervisor, a man she had genuinely liked, cried when he told her. She had gone to the parking lot and sat in the Hyundai for 12 minutes, and then driven to pick up Cass from daycare. She had expected to find something else quickly. Her record was clean, her references were solid, and she had 8 years of documented experience with the specific systems most facilities used. She applied to 23 jobs in the first 8 weeks. 6 interviews. 2 second rounds. 1 offer from a dental office 22 miles east, $31,000 a year, no benefits, and a commute that, combined with the cost of daycare, would have left her less per month than the unemployment check provided. She turned it down and went back to applications. Derek left in December. She had known it was coming in the way you could know something without allowing yourself to think it directly. He was unhappy. He said so in the 11-minute phone call they had after he moved his things out, and he said he needed more 5 separate times without specifying more of what. He moved to Knoxville with a woman named Stephanie who sold real estate, and his income of $54,000 a year with overtime went with him. The child support order came through 4 months later. He paid it for 2 months. Then he stopped, and when she called the enforcement office, she learned he had left his job and was working under the table for his brother's landscaping company in a capacity that was difficult to document. Her lawyer filed a contempt motion. 6 to 8 months, the lawyer said. That was 13 months ago. She accepted the dental office job in January, the one she had turned down, because by then the unemployment benefits were exhausted and most of her savings were gone, and the math of daycare was moot since she could no longer afford it. Owen, who was 9 years and 4 months old, became the person who watched Cass after school. He was good at it. He was good at most things he turned his attention to, which was a quality she had stopped being sad about and started being grateful for, because looking at what it meant would have cost her something she did not have. The apartment on Whitfield Road ended in August. 2 months behind. The landlord, Gerald Hobbs, had rented to her for 6 years and looked more uncomfortable than she felt when he handed over the 30-day notice. He had a mortgage too. She understood it. There was no argument to make. She went to the county shelter first. 6-week wait for family housing. The intake worker gave her a referral card for a motel voucher program and called both motels on the list. Both had waiting lists. She drove to the Walmart parking lot on Route 32 and sat in the car until it was nearly dark, and then drove to a 24-hour Waffle House and parked at the far end of the lot where the lights did not reach. They were in the car for 22 nights. She kept them clean. The truck stop shower on Route 40 cost $3, and she could do it twice a week without wrecking the budget. Laundry at a Coin Laundry in Newport old machines, hot dryers, under $7 if she timed the cycles. She parked in different places each night. The Walmart lot, a church lot whose pastor she had met once and who she believed would not call anyone. The far end of a gas station that closed at 10. Owen said nothing about any of it that was not practical. He asked once, 3 days in, whether the car would have enough gas to stay warm if the temperature dropped below freezing at night. She said yes. He nodded. He never asked again. Cass asked once where they were going to sleep, and Delia said they were on a camping trip, and Cass accepted it the way a 6-year-old accepted things from a mother she still trusted completely, which was a trust Delia both needed and found harder to carry than almost anything else. The hardest part was not the cold or the cramped sleeping or the particular indignity of being 33 years old and washing her face in a truck stop bathroom sink. The hardest part was Owen. Not what he said, because he said almost nothing. It was what he did not do. He did not cry. He did not argue. He did not ask why or for how long or whether things would get better. He organized. He kept track of which parking lot was safest on which night. He checked the gas gauge every evening and told her the number without her asking. He helped Cass with her reading by the light of a phone charger plugged into the car's accessory outlet. He was 9 years old, and he had decided, without being told, that his job was to make things easier, and watching him do that had a way of sitting in Delia's chest that she did not have words for. Cass adapted in a different way. She had always been the one who expressed everything, every hunger and cold and happiness and frustration, in real time, without editing. But on the 6th night, she had woken crying in the back seat, and Delia had held her and told her it was okay. They were okay. And Cass had looked at her in the pale parking lot light with wet eyes and said, "Okay, Mama." And by the following morning, she had stopped mentioning the car or the cold or the fact that they no longer had their own bathroom or their own kitchen or their own anything. She had reorganized herself around the situation in the way children did when they sensed that their mother could not afford additional weight. She played with Button. She asked for stories at night. She said goodnight to the moon through the car window the way she always had, as if the moon were a constant thing in an inconstant world, which it was. Delia carried both of them in her chest through those 22 nights and drove carefully and did not allow herself to think past the next day. She called Renee on the 23rd day. Renee was 3 years older and had stayed in Marrow when Delia left for Newport. She had married Carl Haynes, who managed an industrial supply warehouse and had the particular settled confidence of a man whose life had gone roughly the way he had expected. The house in Marrow was their parents' house, left to Renee as the one who had remained. It had 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom and a laundry room with room enough for a cot, and Renee had said yes without hesitation when Delia called. But Carl had looked at the car when they arrived, and then at the children, and then at Delia, and said, "We don't have a lot of space," in a tone that meant something beyond what the words said. 63 days on a cot in the laundry room, smelling fabric softener, listening to the dryer cycle in the evenings. She had taken a job at the Marrow grocery store, 16 hours a week. A Saturday cleaning shift at a salon 3 blocks away. The money went in and went back out. Food, her share of utilities, Owen's school supplies, an inhaler refill for Cass. She was not sinking further. But she was not rising either. She was standing on borrowed floor. That morning, after the sky had gone from gray to pale and Renee had come down to start coffee, without saying anything more than morning and setting a second mug out for Delia without asking, she went back to the laundry room and took out her phone and looked at the county property website again. She spent the morning at the public library, where she used one of the computers without being counted against her data plan. She pulled up the county assessor's records for Parcel 44 to 811. The land value was listed at $1,200. The structure value was 0, reflecting the condemnation. A zoning violation record from 2011 detailed the specific deficiencies: substandard roof, pier foundation failure on the south corner, no functioning septic since 2008. A lien search showed no outstanding debt. Mabel Corwin had owned the land outright. She found one photograph of the cabin. Someone had posted it to a local history group on Facebook in 2019, a man who said he was cataloging old structures in the Greer's Hollow area before they disappeared. The photograph was taken from a distance, through bare winter trees, and showed the cabin in late afternoon light. The chimney was standing. The metal roof was still on. The walls were up. It was not a good photograph, but it showed a structure that had not yet become the ruin it might have been. She measured what she could on the satellite view. The road off Route 321. The county road turnoff. The gravel lane. The creek to the left of the property. The nearest school, Hartford Elementary, 8 miles south. 14.6 acres. A cabin with a stone chimney. A creek. $300. She was at the library for 2 hours. When she drove back to Renee's house, she parked in the driveway and sat for a few minutes before going inside. That night, when Renee and Carl had gone to bed, she went to the ATM at the grocery store and withdrew the $300 in 10s and 20s. She put the bills in an envelope from Owen's school photo order packet. She counted them twice in the car. Then she came back inside and sat on the edge of the couch near Owen's feet. He opened his eyes immediately, which confirmed what she had suspected, that he had not been asleep. "There's an auction tomorrow morning," she said. "I'm going to go bid on something." He waited. "It's a piece of land. 14 acres, with a cabin on it. The cabin is condemned, which means it needs a lot of work, more than I know how to do right now. But the land is real and the starting bid is $300. "That's almost everything," he said. "It is everything. We'd have 19 left." He was quiet for a moment, not thinking it over, she could tell, but choosing how to say what he had already decided. "It's a real cabin. Like actual walls. Actual walls. Actual land. No rent." "Okay," he said. "You're not going to tell me not to do it." He looked at her with the expression he had learned sometime in the past several months, the one that belonged on someone twice his age. "I think you already know if you should do it." She looked at him. 10 years old. Sleeping on a borrowed couch in his gray tant's living room, watching his little sister, not complaining about any of it. Waiting, the way he had been waiting, for something to change. "Get some sleep," she said. "You too," he said. She knew he knew she wouldn't. The morning of the auction was cold and clear, the kind of March morning in East Tennessee where the sky turned a pale sharp blue that had no warmth in it at all, and the light was bright enough to make your eyes water. She told Renee she was running errands and would be back by noon. Renee was making coffee and said okay in the manner of someone who had decided not to ask questions because the answers might require responses she didn't have. It was not unkindness. It was a kind of tree-off. She drove 34 miles to Newport on roads she had learned thoroughly, every stoplight and bridge, and the specific heave in the county road near Paint Rock Creek. She was at the courthouse by 8:30. She signed in at the folding table, collected a paddle with the number 11 written in black marker, and found a chair in the back of the auction room. 15 people, maybe. Metal folding chairs, a podium, a county clerk at a table with manila folders stacked in parcel order. The room smelled of institutional carpet and the specific coffee that came from large urns that were never properly cleaned between uses. She recognized the type of most of the other bidders without knowing their names. 2 contractors in work shirts who held their paddles with the ease of men who had done this many times. An older couple who turned out to be bidding on a commercial lot, and who sat close together and talked quietly and had nothing to do with her. A man in a vest with the logo of a regional property development company who kept checking his phone with the air of someone performing busyness. A man in a good coat near the back wall who did not speak to anyone and whose paddle never moved. The auctioneer was a county employee with reading glasses and a flat, professional manner. He worked through the lots: drainage easement, storage facility, vacant commercial property, residential lot. She watched the money move through the room and held her paddle in her lap and waited. When he read her parcel number, she heard the man in the vest shift in his chair. 14.6 acres, Greer's Hollow Road, unincorporated. Cabin on property, condemned 2011, sold as is, no representations as to condition. Starting bid $300. She raised her paddle. No other paddle moved. The auctioneer looked around the room with the patience of someone who had seen all versions of this. "Do I have $350? Silence. She heard the man in the vest lean toward the contractor beside him. She could not make out words, but she heard the contractor's short exhale through his nose. Not quite a laugh, but the structure of one. $300 going once. She looked at the paddle in her lap. 11. $300 going twice. The gavel came down. She was at the clerk's table for 4 minutes. She counted out the bills, 10s and 20s. The clerk counted them back and slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside, a deed copy, a property survey map with the parcel outlined in red ink, and a key ring holding 2 keys. One was a standard deadbolt key. The other was smaller, the size of a padlock key, with no label. She walked out of the courthouse into the March air. She was halfway to her car when she heard footsteps behind her on the courthouse steps. She turned. The man in the vest. He had his phone in his hand, but was not looking at it. "Hang on," he said. Friendly tone, the kind that cost nothing. "That Corwin property. You bought it for personal use or investment?" "Personal use." He nodded slowly, the way people nodded when they were assembling a verdict rather than actually agreeing. "That place has been sitting condemned for 13 years. The foundation's mostly gone on the south side. No septic, no electric. Road access is barely a road." He paused, letting that settle. "I'm not trying to be discouraging. I'm in the business. We looked at that parcel a couple of years back and passed. Just thought you might want to know why no one else bid on it today." She looked at him. "I appreciate that. $300, he said, and there was something in the way he said it. Not mean, but final, like a number that explained everything about her situation to him. He gave her a brief nod and went back up the steps. She got in the car. She sat for a moment and looked at the courthouse building and then at the folder on the passenger seat, the deed copy, and the survey map and the 2 keys. Then she picked up her phone and called Renee. Renee answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey," Delia said. "I need to tell you something." "What happened?" "Nothing bad. I went to a county auction this morning. I bought a piece of land." The pause that followed was long enough to be its own kind of answer. "Land," Renee said finally. 14 acres. Out past Greer's Hollow. There's a cabin on it." "A condemned cabin?" "Yes." Another pause. "Delia, you have," she stopped. Started again. "How much did you spend?" $300. "That's your last $300. Almost." She could hear Renee breathing on the other end. Then Carl's voice in the background, asking something she couldn't make out. Renee said, "Hold on," and there was the sound of a door closing. "Dee," she said, quieter now. "I love you. You know I love you. But you have 2 kids, and you just spent your last money on a piece of property in the middle of nowhere that has been condemned for over a decade. What is the plan? What is the actual plan?" "I don't have a full plan yet. That's what worries me." She wasn't unkind about it. That was the thing about Renee. She was never unkind. That's a lot of work. Condemned means the county has already decided it's past saving. You'd need a new septic system alone, and those run $15,000, $20,000. Where does that money come from? "I don't know yet. And in the meantime, you and the kids are going to live in a condemned cabin with no plumbing?" "I'm going to go look at it first." A longer pause this time. "Be careful on those roads. The ones out past Greer's Hollow are bad in March." It was not a blessing, and it was not a condemnation. It was Renee being Renee, which was the most she had to offer. Delia drove south on 321 and then turned onto a county road that narrowed as it went, losing its center line and then its painted shoulder and eventually its reliable surface, turning from state highway to county road to something that was listed on the map as Greer's Hollow Road but existed in practice as a lane of packed gravel and packed clay, 1 vehicle wide, with cedar branches growing close enough on both sides to scrape the mirrors. The hills folded in around her. The cell signal dropped from 2 bars to 1 bar to nothing. The temperature outside the car was 34 degrees, and the cedar trees held patches of old snow in their shadows. She had no radio signal this far in. No sound except the road under the tires and branches occasionally scraping across the roof. She drove at the speed the road allowed and had nothing to do but think, which she normally would have avoided. But some part of her had already crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. The man in the vest had said $300 in a tone that meant you have revealed what kind of person you are with this bid. Renee had said we looked at that parcel 2 years back and passed. Everyone who had weighed the evidence had arrived at the same rational conclusion, and she had arrived at a different one, and she was the only person in her position, with $19 left over and 2 children at a relative's house and a cot in a laundry room, who would understand why rational and right were not always the same calculation. She drove by the odometer. 3.2 miles from the county road turnoff. The road dropped through a fold in the hills and came out into a clearing. She stopped the car. The sky above the clearing was wide, the kind of wide that felt disproportionate to everything around it. More sky than the space seemed to have earned. And in the center of that clearing, set back from the lane by 40 feet of overgrown grass and the memory of a fence line, was the cabin. It was smaller than she had imagined from the satellite image. One story, built from hewn logs, the old kind, cut and fitted before anyone had a machine to do it. The chinking between the logs had crumbled out in places, leaving thin gaps that daylight would come through from inside on a bright afternoon. The metal roof had been painted red at some point, possibly decades ago, and had since gone the color of old blood, rust-streaked and faded in the way that iron did when it was left to the weather long enough. The porch across the front had partially collapsed at the left corner, the support post rotted through at its base, the overhang above it tilted at an angle that looked like a shrug. One of the front windows had a long diagonal crack across the lower pane. The other was intact. The door was solid, original hardware, a thumb latch handle above the deadbolt. The chimney at the rear of the cabin was built from river rock, flat stones fitted together in the patient, careful way of someone who had time and intention. The mortar had darkened with decades, but was holding. The chimney cap was intact. It was the most complete thing about the exterior. Behind the cabin, the land rose steeply through bare oaks and cedars to a ridgeline. To the left, maybe 40 yards away, a creek was moving fast with snowmelt, audible through the car window when she rolled it down. The clearing had been a garden. The old row lines were still visible as low mounds in the dead grass, and the wire frame of a tomato cage stuck up through the weeds near the right side of the structure. Fence posts stood at intervals with no wire left between them, marking the edge of what had once been an organized piece of ground. Mabel Corwin had gardened this land for decades, had put seeds in it and pulled things out of it, and probably stood where Delia was standing and looked at it in the long afternoon light the same way Delia was looking at it now. She had worked the textile mill for 30-some years, and then come back to this hollow and grown things, and kept to herself, and been remembered in 3 paragraphs by a local newspaper and in no other public record that Delia had been able to find. No relatives, no interviews, no photographs except the grainy one from the Facebook history group. She had lived here for the last 40 years of her life and left behind a cabin, some garden rows, and a hidden room full of things someone was still coming back to tend. Whatever Mabel Corwin had been, she had not been nothing. She got out of the car. The porch boards were soft underfoot, and she tested each one before committing her weight, finding the path along the outer edges where the joists were likely more solid. The deadbolt lock was old steel, slightly stiff, but the key from the folder turned it on the second try. She pushed the door open. She stepped inside. The first thing was the smell. Not mold, which she had expected and steeled herself against. Not the wet decay of a structure that had been closed for years. The smell that hit her in the doorway was wood smoke. Recent wood smoke. The specific smell of wood that had burned not days ago but hours. She stood in the doorway and let her eyes adjust. The main room was about 25 feet deep and 18 feet wide, with a cooking alcove along the back wall where a wood stove had once stood, its outline still ghosted on the wall behind it. The floor was wide plank pine, the boards uneven with settling but intact, the wood darkened to a color between amber and old honey. The walls were the interior face of the same hewn logs, worn smooth where people had moved through and rough where they had not. Exposed rafters crossed the ceiling above, the spaces between them opened to the underside of the metal roof. The fireplace occupied most of the left wall. Fieldstone, river rock, fitted carefully in a pattern that followed the natural shapes of the stones rather than cutting them square. The hearth was wide and deep, and above the firebox, on the stone mantle, a tin cup. She crossed the room and crouched in front of the fireplace. The grate held ash. It also held something specific, a fine pale layer sitting on top of old gray ash that was compacted and damp from years of ambient moisture. Recent ash was lighter, almost white, the kind that came from a fire where the wood had burned hot and well. As she crouched there, air moving through the open door shifted the top layer slightly. She watched it move. She put her hand near the firebox opening. Not hot, but warmer than the room around her, warmer than the surrounding stone, warmer than 40-degree air had any reason to leave it. Someone had built a fire in this fireplace last night. Maybe earlier today. She stood and picked up the tin cup from the mantel. It was old enameled tin, the kind used in camping outfits and army mess kits from several decades back, chipped at the rim. The outside was cold against her palm. She turned it and held the inside near her cheek, the way you checked a child's bathwater, and felt something there. Not heat. The memory of heat, the specific warmth that metal held for hours after liquid had been poured out of it. Someone had been here this morning. Before we find out what happened next in the story, I want to take a brief moment to speak directly to anyone watching who might be going through their own sudden, overwhelming transition. If you are navigating a bitter divorce, the loss of a spouse, or a financial shock, you know the hardest part isn't just the money. It's not knowing what to do first. That is exactly why we created the Phoenix Blueprint. It is a practical, step-by-step guide for starting over. It doesn't have fluffy affirmations or vision boards. It is a tactical survival manual. It gives you the exact checklist for the first 48 hours, including the one rule you must follow. Do not make any decision you cannot reverse. It includes the Found Money worksheet, showing you exactly how to check state databases because 1 in 7 Americans actually has unclaimed money waiting for them right now. It even gives you word-for-word boundary scripts to use when family members pressure you for money or try to make decisions for you. You can get the entire guide right now for just $17. If you're watching on your TV, just pull out your phone, open your camera, and scan the QR code on the screen right now. If you're on a computer or phone, click the top link in the description. You don't have to figure this out alone. Now, let's get back to the story. She set the cup down and turned to face the room. There was no furniture except one thing, a straight-backed wooden chair in the far corner near the door, with a piece of folded canvas draped over its seat. Olive drab canvas, the military surplus kind. She left it and moved through the room. The walls held marks she had not expected. Not damage, but traces. A row of small nails above the fireplace mantle where something had once hung, pictures or tools, the spacing deliberate. A section of wall near the bedroom door where the log surface had been rubbed smooth by years of a shoulder or an elbow passing through the same narrow gap. A window latch that had been used so many thousands of times the paint around it was worn entirely away to bare metal. A house carried the residue of whoever had lived in it, and this one carried Mabel Corwin in the wear patterns. In the nails placed where a particular pair of hands at a particular height would have found them useful, in the path of smooth floor from the front door to the fireplace, where she had walked the same route through every winter for decades. The kitchen alcove held a single surviving detail from the years of use. A small shelf, no wider than a hand span, built into the wall beside where the stove had stood, at shoulder height. On it, nothing. But the wood of the shelf surface was darkened in a ring shape at the center, the specific darkening that came from a container set in the same place many times over many years. A canister, maybe. A jar. Something she had reached for every day and set back in the same spot every day until the wood remembered the shape of it. She moved to the bedroom. The bedroom was off a door in the right wall. Small, 10 feet square at most. An iron bed frame with no mattress. The joints gone to surface rust, but still structurally holding. One window on the far wall with an old latch hook. She looked at the latch closely. The paint around its pivot was scratched away in a pattern that came from repeated use, back and forth, many times. Beneath the scratched paint, bright metal. The scratches were not old. The wall below the window, when she pressed her palm to it, was a degree warmer than the surrounding surface, the specific warmth that came from sun through glass, or from something that had been set against the wall from outside not long before. She pushed the window open. The hinges moved without protest. Below on the exterior, dead grass, slightly pressed flat in a way that suggested something had rested there. She went back to the main room. She walked it slowly. In the cooking alcove at the back of the cabin, the fixtures were long gone, their outlines on the walls showing where a stove and a shelf had been. The flue connection in the wall was capped with a square of sheet metal screwed in place. On the floor of the alcove, set against the base of the wall, one object, a thin flat-bladed bar, about 18 inches long, the kind of Finnish carpenter used for lifting baseboards and floorboards without splitting surrounding wood. Lightweight, precise, flexible. Not a kitchen tool. Not a tool that belonged in an empty cooking alcove of a cabin that had been vacant for 5 years. Either left here by accident or left here on purpose by someone who had been using it. She stood in the alcove and looked at the floor. The pine boards through most of the cabin showed what 50 years of use and 5 years of neglect looked like. Grime worked into the grain, old wax settled into the wood, the edges of each board packed with compacted debris that had hardened over the years into something close to mortar. This was what a floor looked like when nothing moved it. You could read years of stillness in the seams. But along the back wall of the cooking alcove, 3 boards were different. She crouched down. Same wood, same age, same species. The surface where was consistent with the rest of the alcove floor, the scuffing from whoever had stood here cooking over the years. But the seams between these 3 boards were clean. Not cleaned recently as in wiped or swept. Clean in the specific way that seams became clean when boards were lifted and replaced with regularity, when the grime that tried to pack itself into the gap got disturbed before it could set. A gap that had been opened and closed many times would look exactly like this. And the nail holes at the edges of those 3 boards. She bent lower and looked closely. The wood around the holes was old and weathered, matching everything else. But the holes themselves had a slight metallic sheen, a brightness that came not from new nails, but from nails that had been pulled and reseated carefully, going back into the same holes, again and again, until the metal in the holes was worn smooth. She pressed her palm flat on the first board and pushed down. It did not flex the way a board resting on joists flexed. It moved slightly downward, and then stopped, in a way that suggested there was space below it rather than solid ground. She picked up the flat bar from where it lay against the wall. She slid the blade under the edge of the first board and pressed down on the handle. The board rose without resistance. The nails pulled cleanly from their holes, the way boards came up when they had been built to be removable. She set it aside. She lifted the second, the third. Beneath them was not a crawl space, not dirt and joists. It was a room, a low-ceilinged room cut from the earth beneath the cabin, its floor at least 3 feet below the level of the floorboards, its walls faced with flat river stones set in old mortar. The air that came up from it was cold and dry, and it smelled like stone and something else, something she could not name precisely at first. Like paper kept in a good place for a very long time. Like something old that had been maintained. She took out her phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam went down into the space. She held it steady and let her eyes follow it. The cellar extended back 8 feet under the rear wall of the cabin. Along both interior walls, wooden shelving had been built from old lumber, double-braced, the uprights set into the stone floor with the care of someone who intended the shelves to bear real weight. And on those shelves, arranged with a deliberateness that was plain even in the angled light of a phone flashlight, were objects. Dozens of them, wrapped in canvas and oilcloth and, in some cases, heavy brown paper sealed with old tape. Some were flat, the shape and proportion of framed paintings or large photographs, their corners padded before wrapping with folded cloth. Some were cylindrical, wrapped carefully and laid on their sides across the shelf supports. Some sat in wooden crates with screwed-down lids, stenciled on the sides with faded markings she could not read from above. The bottom shelf held a row of smaller things stored in individual drawstring pouches, each cinched closed separately, the kind of storage used for objects that could not be allowed to shift or touch. The shelving wood was dry. The stone walls showed no moisture staining. The air in the cellar was cold in a way that preserved rather than damaged, the specific temperature that someone would have chosen deliberately for exactly this purpose. Dozens of objects. In a room below the floor. Of a cabin that had cost $300 at a county auction and had supposedly been empty for 5 years. She held the flashlight steady for a long moment without moving. Then she reached down and touched the nearest one. A flat package, roughly 16 inches by 20, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with cord. She pressed 2 fingers lightly against the surface. The oilcloth was clean, not dusty, not degraded, not showing the slow deterioration that 5 years of exposure produced on almost any material left alone in a closed space. Someone had wrapped this carefully and recently. Someone had been maintaining whatever was inside it against the slow damage of time. The same someone who had built a fire in the fireplace last night and left a tin cup still holding warmth on the stone mantle. The same someone who had left a pry bar on the kitchen floor. She pulled her hand back and straightened up and stood in the cabin that was hers, that had just become something she had not anticipated, and she looked at the room with the open floor and the shelving and the dozens of wrapped objects in the dry cold air below. Then she replaced the boards. She did it carefully, pressing the nails back into their holes by hand until they caught, laying each board back into its place, flattening them with her palm until they matched the surrounding floor. She picked up the flat bar and set it back where she had found it. She walked to the front door. She locked the deadbolt behind her. Outside, The afternoon light had shifted to the lower angle that came in March when the sun began its early retreat. She had maybe 40 minutes of daylight left. She walked to the car and got in and sat with her hands on the wheel and looked at the cabin through the windshield. The chimney rose straight against the pale sky. The cracked window caught the light at the angle that made it look like it was still whole. The tin cup sat on the mantle inside where the fireplace was still slightly warm. She had $19. She had a deed copy in a manila folder on the passenger seat. She had 2 children at her sister's house, and a cot in a laundry room waiting for her, and a man in a vest who had looked at her number and seen the sum of what she was worth. And she had a room under the floor of this cabin, dry and cold and maintained by someone who did not want anyone to find it, full of things she could not yet see clearly enough to name. She took out her phone and called Owen. He answered on the second ring. "Mama," he said, "is something wrong?" She watched the cabin in the low afternoon light, the chimney, the cracked window, the door she had just locked. "No," she said. "Something is exactly the opposite. I'm coming home. Make sure Cass has her dinner." She started the car. She looked one more time at the cabin as she turned in the clearing and headed back down the gravel lane toward the county road. The cedars closed around the car. The clearing disappeared behind her. She had not told him about the fire. She had not told him about the cup. She had not told him about the pry bar, or the 3 boards with their clean seams, or the room below the floor with its careful shelving and its wrapped contents that had not been allowed to collect a single year's worth of dust. She would tell him when she got back. She would tell him everything. But for now she drove through the cedars toward the county road, and the number she was running in her head for the first time in 16 months was not the number of dollars she had, or the number of days she owed, or the number of months the contempt. Motion had been sitting in a courthouse somewhere waiting for a judge to care. It was not the balance on the credit card she no longer used. It was not the gap between what she earned and what she needed to close. The number she was running was the count of those wrapped objects on those shelves in that dry, cold room under the floor, the ones she had been able to see in the beam of a phone flashlight before she made herself look away and put the boards back. She had stopped counting at 40. 40 objects wrapped and stored and maintained in a hidden room under the floor of a cabin that the county of Cocke, Tennessee, had sold for $300 to a woman with $19 left to her name. Someone already knew they were there, and whoever it was had been there the night before, building a fire against the March cold, keeping watch over whatever Mabel Corwin had spent her life gathering in a place no one was supposed to find. The cedars thinned. The county road appeared ahead of her. Delia drove onto it and turned north toward Marrow, and the gravel lane and the clearing and the stone chimney and the room below the floor all fell away behind the hills. She would go back tomorrow. She would bring a real flashlight and a notebook and more time than the afternoon had given her. She would bring Owen if she could manage it, or go alone if she could not. She would find out what Mabel Corwin had hidden, and she would find out who else knew it was there. She did not tell Renee. She sat at dinner that Sunday evening and passed the bread and asked about Renee's daughter's volleyball tryouts and listened to Carl talk about a shipment delay at the warehouse. And she said nothing about the cabin or the cellar or the fire that had burned itself out by the time she arrived, and the 40-some wrapped objects arranged on stone shelving in dry, cold air under a floor that the Cocke County Property Office had valued at $0. She was not trying to deceive anyone. She was trying to keep something intact long enough to understand it. The moment she spoke the words out loud to people who had already made up their minds about the cabin, the $300 cabin, the condemned cabin in the middle of nowhere that she had spent her last money on, she would have to fight a reaction before she had the information to fight it with. Renee would worry. Carl would calculate. And she would spend the next 24 hours defending a decision she had not yet been able to explain to herself. So she said nothing and helped with the dishes and tucked Cass in and sat on the edge of the couch near Owen's feet. He was already awake. She told him everything. The fireplace and the ash that was recent. The tin cup with the memory of warmth in it. The 3 boards with their clean seams and the flat bar that had no business being in a cooking alcove. The cellar below, the shelving, the wrapped objects in their oilcloth and canvas, the specific cold of a space that had been kept dry on purpose. Owen listened. He did not interrupt. He had his knees pulled up and his backpack on the couch beside him, as always, and when she finished he was quiet for a moment. "How many total?" he said. "At least 40. I stopped counting." "What's in them?" "I don't know yet." He thought about it. "We should go back tomorrow before anyone else does." She nodded. I should come, he said. It was not a question. I know. You should come. She pulled the folded deed copy from her jacket pocket and set it on the couch between them. He looked at it without picking it up, the way he looked at math problems before he started, taking the measure of something before touching it. It's real, he said. It's real. He picked up the deed copy and read it. She watched his face in the low light coming through the doorway from the kitchen. He read slowly and carefully, the way he read everything. And when he finished, he folded it again and set it back on the couch. Okay, he said. She left at 6 the next morning in the dark, with Owen in the passenger seat and his backpack on his lap. She told Renee at 5:30 that she was going back to assess the cabin, which was true, and that she was bringing Owen to help, which was also true, and Renee said be home by dinner and poured coffee and did not ask more questions. She had learned, in 63 days, approximately how much she was willing to push Delia about things Delia had already decided. Cass was still asleep. Delia had written a note and set it on the kitchen table. Button is on your pallet. I will be home for dinner. I love you. They drove south in the dark. Owen watched the road and did not talk, which was fine. She had the radio on low, something country, and she drove the way she always drove on these roads now, with the particular muscle memory of someone who had committed a route to their hands rather than their head. The sky was lightening to gray by the time she turned onto Greer's hollow road. The cedars were pale and still. There was no wind. The temperature was 29 degrees, and the ground on both sides of the lane held a light frost that caught the headlights and threw them back in cold white points. She parked in the clearing. The cabin looked the same as she had left it. The sagging porch corner, the cracked window, the stone chimney against the pale sky. Nothing had changed that she could see. She sat for a moment. Ready? Owen said. Give me a second. She was looking at the cabin and doing the specific thing she had been doing since she first saw it the morning before, which was trying to let herself believe it was real and hers, and not somehow a mistake or a thing that would be taken back. $300. The deed was in the folder on the passenger seat. Her name was on it. She got out of the car. The porch held her weight on the same path along the outer edges. The key turned in the lock. She pushed the door open. The fireplace was cold. She had expected that. But she checked it anyway, crouching down, running her hand over the ash, and the ash was cold and settling, the recent layer no longer distinguishable from the older one below. Whoever had built that fire the night before she first came here had not been back. She stood and looked at the tin cup. It was where she had left it. Owen was already at the cooking alcove, looking at the floor. He had the flat bar in his hand, picked up from where she had returned it to the wall. He was studying the seams between the boards with his phone flashlight. These three, she said, coming up beside him. I can see it. He handed her the bar, and she lifted the boards the same way she had the day before, the nails pulling cleanly from their holes, the boards rising without resistance, and the cold, dry air came up from below the way it had before, carrying that smell she had not been able to name precisely, old paper and stone and something preserved. Owen looked down into the space with his flashlight. He did not say anything for a long moment. Then he said, That's a lot. Yes. She heard the truck. They heard it at the same time, both of them looking toward the door, toward the sound of an engine on the gravel lane, coming down through the cedars from the direction of the county road. Not driving fast. An old truck, by the sound, something with a diesel knock in the engine that ran through well-maintained middle age rather than deterioration. Owen looked at her. Stay inside, she said. She went to the window. A gray pickup, probably 2004 or 2005, a Chevy with its original paint gone slightly chalky, but its body intact, came into the clearing and stopped next to her car. The driver looked at her car first, then looked at the cabin. Then he turned off the engine. He sat in the truck for a moment without moving. She could see his profile through the side glass, an older man, 60 or so, in a canvas jacket. He was deciding something. She could read it in the stillness. Then he opened the door and got out slowly, the way people moved when they wanted their movements to be readable from a distance, unhurried and open. He had a canvas bag over one shoulder. His hands were visible. He stopped 10 feet from the porch and looked at the cabin door. She opened it. He looked at her. His face was older than she had thought from the truck, 63 or 64. Weathered in the specific way of people who spent most of their lives outdoors in a place with real seasons. Gray stubble, clear eyes, pale blue, the kind that looked like they had been watching things carefully for a long time. He said, "You bought the property last Saturday." He nodded. He looked at the door behind her, just briefly, and then back at her face. "I found the county notice on the door last week. Came to check on things, and it was there." "You've been coming here?" "Yes, ma'am. Monthly. For 5 years." She stepped to the edge of the porch and stopped there. "Who are you?" "Ray Childress. I live about 3 miles back, on the county road. I was Mabel's neighbor for 30 years. He paused. "Her closest neighbor, anyway. Out here, closest means something different than it does in town." She studied him. He met her look without flinching and without performing anything. There was no agenda visible in his face, only a careful patience that suggested he had thought about this conversation before he drove down here, had known it was probably coming, and had decided to have it honestly. "Come in," she said. He came up the porch steps carefully, testing the boards the same way she did, and she recognized in that motion someone who had been in this cabin before, who knew its weak spots, who moved through it with the body knowledge of long familiarity. Owen was standing near the cooking alcove with his backpack on. He looked at the man with the measuring expression he had developed over the past several months, the one that calculated before committing. Ray looked at him. "That your boy?" "My son Owen." Ray nodded at him. Owen nodded back, a small, serious nod. Ray set his canvas bag on the floor near the door and looked at the cabin the way someone looked at a place they had known long and had not expected to see again under changed circumstances. His gaze moved across the walls and the ceiling and the fireplace, taking inventory. "How'd you come to bid on it?" he asked. She told him. The laundry room, the goldenrod notice, the $300, the 2 weeks that had become 63 days. She did not make it shorter than it was, and she did not dress it up, and he listened with his hands at his sides and his eyes on her face, not with pity, which she had learned to recognize and preemptively resent, but with the kind of attention that meant he was actually listening. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mabel would have liked that." "Why?" "Because she always said the land should go to someone who needed it rather than someone who wanted to flip it." He paused. "She never said that to the county, obviously. She said it to me. Over the years." Delia looked at him. "What did she ask you to do?" "Come once a month. Air the cabin out. Check the cellar temperature. Look at the wrappings. Make sure nothing was deteriorating." He turned slightly toward the cooking alcove, where the boards were still lifted from the floor. Then back to her. "So you found it already?" "Yesterday." "What did you see?" "Wrapped objects on shelving. 40 or more. I didn't go down." He was quiet for a moment. "I never went down either. She showed me where the floorboards were and how to check the temperature at the top of the stairs without going in. She said the cool air and the dry stone were enough if you didn't disturb the wrappings." He looked at the open floor. "I never opened anything. She didn't ask me to, and I didn't think it was my place." "What did she tell you was down there?" "She said, things I collected. Things that matter." He delivered these words in a specific way, the way you delivered words you had been carrying for years and had never had the right occasion to set down. "She said if anyone ever came for the property, give them the bag. She gave me the bag about 2 years before she moved to the facility. Said she wanted it close to someone who would know when to hand it over." He picked up the canvas bag from the floor. He held it out to her. She took it. It was not heavy. She could feel through the canvas that there was something small and rectangular inside, something the size and density of a hardback book. And something else, smaller, metal, a key on a ring. She unzipped the bag. Inside, a composition notebook, the black and white kind with the marbled cover, smaller than a standard one, the cover worn soft with handling. And a key on a ring, the same size and type as the smaller key from the auction envelope. She opened the notebook. The handwriting was small and neat, the way handwriting looked when the writer had been careful about space for a long time, a habit developed from writing more than there was ever room for. The first page had a date in the top right corner, September 14th, 1963. Below it, a name, Solomon Bright, Sevier County. Carved figures, pine and walnut, for pieces. Paid $6. Condition, excellent. Location, second shelf, north wall, crate 1. She turned the page. October 2nd, 1963. Nadine Parcel, Cocke County. Drawings, charcoal on cardstock, 8 pieces. Paid $2 for the set. Location, third shelf, south wall, flat package. She kept turning. Each page the same format. in slightly different ink and slightly shifted handwriting across the decades. The hand of someone aging slowly through a long and deliberate project. Names she did not recognize. Counties she knew: Sevier, Harlan, Grundy, Cocke, Carter, Scott. Dates spanning from 1963 to 2001. Amounts paid that were almost never more than $50 and frequently less than 10. She turned to the last entry. August 3, 2001. Coleman Hale, Grundy County. Painting on canvas, large, approximately 36 by 48 inches. Oil and commercial house paint. Paid $160. The best thing I have found in 10 years. Location: bottom crate, south wall. Handle with care. 47 entries. She closed the notebook and looked at Ray. Mabel collected things, she said. It was not quite a question. She did. All her adult life, far as I could tell. She used to drive on weekends, sometimes for several days. Said she was visiting people. I didn't know what that meant until about 15 years ago when she showed me the cellar. Do you know what any of it is worth? He shook his head. She didn't talk about money. She talked about the people. Said she'd rather remember what they were doing than what it cost. Owen was already looking at the notebook over her shoulder. He had his phone out. She looked at Ray. Can you get a signal out here? I have a hotspot in the truck. Can we use it? He nodded. He went out to get it. She looked at Owen. He looked back at her. How many entries? He said. 47. He ran the math in his head without a calculator, the way he always did. Then he looked at the open floor and the darkness below it and said, quietly, what she was already thinking. We should go down. Ray came back with a square black device about the size of a deck of cards and a propane lantern. He set the lantern on the wooden chair in the corner and lit it. The light changed the whole room, warm and even. Reaching into corners the phone flashlight had left dark. He handed her the hotspot. He looked at the open floor. I'll go first if you want. I know the stairs. She looked at him for a moment. He was a man she had met 40 minutes ago. But he had driven here alone and come to the door with his hands visible and given her the bag without being asked, and there was nothing in his face she did not recognize. The look of someone who had been carrying a responsibility they had not asked for and were relieved, in some way she could not yet measure, to hand off to the person it actually belonged to. Let's go together, she said. Owen came without being invited or told not to. She did not argue with this. Ray went first with the lantern. The stone stairs were carved from flat red sandstone, 14 steps. The walls on both sides bear rock with tool marks visible where someone had cut them. The temperature dropped with each step, not drastically but steadily, the way a root cellar dropped in August, until at the bottom she could see her own breath. The lantern light opened the cellar completely. It was larger than it had seemed in the phone flashlight beam the day before. Roughly 14 feet wide and 10 feet deep with an 8-foot ceiling, the whole thing cut from bedrock. The walls were faced with river stone, mortared and fitted with the same patient skill as the chimney above. The floor was poured concrete, smoothed and sealed. Someone had done serious construction work here, the kind that cost real money and several weeks of labor, and the work had been done well enough that 60 years had not compromised it. The shelving ran floor to ceiling on both walls, the uprights set in concrete anchors, the horizontal supports cut from 2x6 lumber that was old but dry and solid. The arrangement was methodical, flat packages together by size, the largest on the bottom, the smaller ones above. The cylindrical rolls in their own section. The wooden crates along the base of the south wall, 4 of them, each with a screwed lid. A row of individual drawstring pouches at eye level, each one labeled in Mabel's small, careful handwriting. The smell was cold stone and something else, a dryness that had a quality she associated with archives, with old paper kept away from moisture and light for a very long time. Ray held the lantern at shoulder height and turned slowly, looking at it. All these years, he said. He said it more to himself than to them. Owen was already looking at the notebook, cross-referencing entries with what he could see on the shelves. He moved down the south wall reading labels on the crate sides. Delia stopped in front of the flat packages on the north wall. Second shelf from the bottom, the notebook said, for the entry dated August 14, 1974. James Ray Sexton, Harlan County, Kentucky. Paintings on board, 8 pieces. Paid $20 each. Exceptional work. The most important thing I have found to date. 8 packages in a row on that shelf, each wrapped in oilcloth, each tied with cotton cord. She touched the edge of the nearest one. The oilcloth was clean and pliable, not cracked or degraded, maintained in exactly the way Mabel had asked Ray to maintain it. She looked at Ray. The notebook says these are the most important. I want to start here. He nodded. You're the owner. You decide. She lifted the nearest package and set it on the concrete floor. She cut the cord with her pocket knife and folded the oilcloth back layer by layer, slowly, the way you handled something you did not yet know how to touch. Inside was a wooden frame, the old kind, made from simple mitered wood with no ornamentation, probably cut by hand. And in the frame, a painting. On pressboard, maybe 18 inches by 24, the surface slightly rough from the base material. Oil paint and what looked like commercial house paint mixed, the colors applied in a way that was not technically trained but was absolutely certain, the certainty of someone who had looked at something for a long time and knew exactly what they wanted to say about it. A mountain scene, late afternoon or early morning, the light between the two, the sky an impossible color between rose and blue that academic training would have argued against. Figures moving through the landscape, small and specific, carrying things on their backs. The mountains behind them so present and physical that she felt the cold of them through the paint. She did not have a formal art education. She knew it. But she had stood in a gallery once, years ago, on a trip to Nashville for a records conference. And she had felt something in front of a painting that she had not been able to explain to Derek when she described it later. The feeling that something true was being said in a language that bypassed the part of the brain that normally filtered things. This felt like that. She turned it over. On the back, in pencil, J. R. Sexton, 1974, Mountain Pass. And in different handwriting, Mabel's handwriting, small and neat. Harlan County, Kentucky. Purchased directly from the artist, August 1974. $20. Owen held the hotspot. The connection light was green. He typed into his phone, James Ray Sexton artist. The results loaded. He read, without speaking for a moment, taking it in before commenting. Then he read aloud. James Ray Sexton, 1941 to 1999. Self-taught painter, born Harlan County, Kentucky. Worked primarily in oil and commercial house paints on found board and cardboard. His work was largely unknown during his lifetime. Rediscovered by scholars of American outsider art in the late 2000s following a retrospective at the American Folk Art Museum in New York. He paused, scrolled. Work held in permanent collections at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, the High Museum of Art in Atlanta, the soul's grown deep foundation. Another pause. Last major auction record. 2 early Sexton paintings sold at Christie's, New York in March 2021 for a combined total of $312,000. The number sat in the cellar like a stone dropped into still water. $312,000. For 2 paintings. From 1974. The same year as this one. Delia looked at the painting in her hands. Looked at the frame, the pressboard, the colors that should not have worked and did. Then she looked at the shelf on the north wall, at the 8 packages in their oilcloth wrapping, all the same size, all from the same trip Mabel had made to Harlan County in August of 1974, when she had sat at a man's kitchen table and paid him $20 each for the best work he had made, and he had probably been grateful for $20. 8 paintings. Owen had already opened a second search for current market comparables. Ray was standing near the stairs with the lantern, very still. His face had changed. Not dramatically, not the theatrical expression of someone performing shock. Just the small shift of a man who had been carrying something for 5 years without knowing what it weighed and had just been told. He said, she knew. Delia looked at him. She knew what she had. He was not asking. She never said so directly, but she kept it this way. This careful. He gestured at the shelving, the oilcloth, the controlled temperature. You don't do all this for things you don't know the value of. She set the Sexton painting carefully against the wall and moved to the next package on the shelf. The second Sexton was larger, roughly 24 by 36. A river scene. Winter, the water dark between frozen edges, a figure standing on the bank in a posture of attention, looking at something beyond the frame's edge. The colors were different from the first, colder and more constrained, but the same certainty was in every brushstroke. On the back, J. R. Sexton, 1974, Clinch River, December. The date suggested he had made this one 4 months after Mabel's visit, and she had acquired it separately. The notebook entry only mentioned the August purchase. She made a note. They opened the 3rd and the 4th. All Sexton. All from 1974 or close to it. All extraordinary, each in a different way. The work of someone who had been making something necessary for his entire life and had been getting better at it for decades. Owen looked up from his phone. The market has been trending upward since 2019. Comparable sales suggest individual early works could be between $150,000 and $200,000 each at current estimates. But authentication and an appraiser's valuation matters significantly for the final number. She looked at Owen. He was 10 years old and reading auction records and market analyses with the steady calm of someone who understood exactly what the numbers meant. She moved to the wooden crates along the south wall. The first crate was labeled in Mabel's handwriting on the top board. S. Bright, Sevier County, 1963 to 1971. She found the small padlock key from the auction envelope in her jacket pocket and tried it on the crate's lock. It turned. She lifted the lid. Inside, packed in cloth between them, 6 carved wooden figures. Each one roughly 12 to 18 inches tall, the wood varying from pine to walnut to what looked like applewood, each carved with tools she could not identify from the marks alone. Animals and human figures, some of them mixed. A figure with a bird's head carrying a bundle. 2 horses facing each other in a posture that was clearly not natural, but was clearly correct. A woman seated with her hands open on her knees, her face turned upward at the angle of paying attention. She lifted the seated woman carefully. The wood was dense and smooth in the way that old, well-dried wood was smooth, the grain following the curves of the figure as if the carver had read the wood before cutting it. On the base, small letters burned in, S. B. 1967. She showed Owen. He searched, Solomon Bright Sevier County Carver. Several results. A museum catalog entry from the Tennessee Art Museum, dated 2016. A paper from a folk art journal. An auction record from Heritage Auctions. Solomon Bright, he read. 1901 to 1975. Wood carver, Sevier County, Tennessee. Work in the permanent collections of the Tennessee State Museum and the American Folk Art Museum. He paused. One piece sold at Heritage Auctions in 2019 for $68,000. Another in 2020 for $82,000. 6 Solomon Bright figures. From 1963 to 1971. The seated woman with her face turned upward had been in this cellar since Mabel carried her down these stairs, and that was 60 years ago, and she had not been allowed to deteriorate or be handled without care, and she was worth more than $60,000 and possibly twice that, and Mabel had bought her for $4. $4. Delia set the figure carefully back in its cloth padding and looked at the other 5. Ray had come further into the cellar now. He was looking at the carving in her hands with an expression she could not name, somewhere between grief and a feeling that did not have a clean word. She thought about the 30 years he had known Mabel. The 30 years of watching her come and go on her weekend trips, bringing things back, carrying them down these stairs. He had known something was here. He had maintained it the way she asked. But he had not known what something meant. She never told you, Delia said. He shook his head. Not in numbers. She said once, toward the end, before she moved. What I have down there is going to matter someday. But she never said what matter meant. She went to the cylindrical rolls next. 6 of them on the 3rd shelf, each wrapped in canvas and tied at both ends. She carefully unrolled the nearest one, spreading it flat on the cellar floor. A series of drawings, charcoal and pencil, each on heavyweight paper. Landscapes, interiors, figures. The work of someone who had been drawing every day for decades, developing the kind of facility with line that was impossible to fake. On the back of each sheet, a name she did not recognize, Eunice Tuttle, and dates, 1977, 1978, 1979. Owen searched. Eunice Tuttle, he said. I'm getting a 2022 exhibition catalog from the High Museum. He waited. Here. 14 of her drawings sold as a collection at a specialized folk and outsider art auction in 2023. Total realized, for $120,000. She sat back on her heels on the concrete floor. $420,000 for 14 drawings. She appeared to be holding at least 12. Owen was very quiet. He was looking at his phone screen, and then at the rolls of paper on the floor, and then back at his phone, doing the math the way he always did, in his head, building toward the number before saying it. When he looked up, his expression was steady, the controlled one he had developed across the past months, the one he used when things seemed too large to let in all at once. He said it anyway. If these are what the notebook says they are, and if condition is acceptable to appraisers. He stopped. Rough math. Tell me rough math. The 8 sextons alone, at conservative estimates, are over $1 million. The bright carvings, 6 pieces at the lower comps, are around 300,000. The Tuttle drawings in the first roll are potentially 250,000. And we haven't opened more than a fraction of what's down here. He looked at the 44 remaining packages on the shelves, the 3 remaining crates, the 5 remaining rolls, the row of individual pouches at eye level. Several $1 million, he said. Maybe more. The number sat in the cold, dry air of the cellar. Several $1 million. In a room under a condemned cabin in a hollow in the Tennessee foothills, on a gravel road with no reliable cell signal, 14 miles from the nearest town. She had $19 in her checking account. She picked up the composition notebook from the floor where she had set it and opened it to the first page again. September 14, 1963. Solomon Bright, Sevier County. Carved figures, pine and walnut, for pieces. Paid $6. 60 years. 47 acquisitions. A woman who worked in a textile mill and drove all over the region on weekends for nearly 4 decades and sat at kitchen tables and paid what she had for things that no market had told her were valuable because she could see that they were true. She thought about the obituary. 3 paragraphs. Known to neighbors as someone who kept to herself and kept a garden. No surviving family. Services private. Mabel Corwin had known exactly what she was doing. She turned to the last page of the notebook. The August 2001 entry about the Coleman Hale painting. Below that entry, on the same page, a postscript added in different ink, with a date, June 3, 2019. 2 years before Mabel moved to the assisted living facility. The handwriting was slower and less certain than the rest of the notebook, the hand of someone older and more deliberate, but the words were clear. To whoever finds this, I have spent 56 years collecting the work of people nobody thought mattered. Artists nobody came to see. People working in sheds and spare rooms and barns who made things that needed to be made and had no one to make them for except themselves. I paid what I had and saved what I could and put it here where it would keep. I have no heirs, and I could not find a proper home for these things while I was alive without powerful people trying to take control of what I built, which they would have done, and they would have taken the credit too. So I left it sealed, and I left it with Ray, and I waited to see what would happen. If you are reading this, you have the property. That means what is here belongs to you now. I only ask one thing. The names on the back of each piece matter more than what they will bring at auction. The artists were real. Their work was real. Remember them by name when you tell people where these things came from. That is the only thing I ever wanted. She read it again. Then she handed it to Ray. He read it standing near the stairs. He read it twice. When he handed it back, his face had the look of a man who had been given an answer to a question he had been carrying for years without knowing how to ask it. She put the notebook in her jacket pocket and stood in the cellar for a moment without moving or speaking. She was thinking about the mill. 35 years of textile mill work, rising at 5 in the morning, operating machinery in a building that was probably loud and hot, and paid what mills paid in the 1960s through the 1990s in rural Tennessee. The kind of work that left you at the end of a shift with your hands tired and your feet tired and enough money to cover rent and food and maybe something extra. And with that extra, year after year for nearly 4 decades, Mabel Corwin had driven out into hollows and small towns in rural counties and sat down with people who were making art because they could not make it. People who had no market and no audience and no name outside their own community. And she had said, I see what you have made, and I want to keep it safe. And here is what I can give you. $20, $6, $4, $40. The amounts paid column in the notebook added up, across 47 entries and 38 years, to approximately $730. $730. For all of it. Delia closed her eyes for a second in the cold cellar air. When she opened them, Owen was watching her. You okay? He said. Yes. She looked at the shelves. Let's keep going. They spent the next 2 hours in the cellar. She did not open everything. She opened enough. 3 more Sexton paintings, all in the same condition, all from the same period, each one different from the last, each one unmistakably by the same hand. 2 more bright carvings, including a figure she could not look away from, a standing man with his arms slightly away from his sides in the posture of someone who has just set down a weight and is not yet sure whether to pick it up again. Another Tuttle roll. The individual pouches on the eye-level shelf, which held, as it turned out, small ceramic objects, hand-built and painted in colors that were wrong and correct in the same way as the Sexton paintings, each labeled in Mabel's handwriting with names she did not recognize and counties she did. One of the unmarked ceramic pieces stopped her. A small figure, maybe 6 inches tall, a child or a person crouching. The surface painted in a deep reddish brown with white marks applied with a small brush in a pattern that was either decorative or linguistic. She could not tell. It fit in her palm. It weighed almost nothing. On the base, in scratched letters, M. W. 1969. She showed Owen. He searched. Nothing came back. No result for the initials and that year, which meant either the artist was not yet in any database or had never been cataloged by anyone except Mabel, which was exactly what Mabel's letter had said. Owen documented everything with his phone camera, methodical and without rushing. He made a list in his paper notebook, names and dates, and the search results he was pulling, building a record that was more organized than it had any right to be for something they had known about for less than 24 hours. Ray held the lantern. He did not speak much, but he was present in the way that mattered, the presence of someone who had been the keeper of this place and was now formally handing that responsibility to someone else, present for the transition. The smaller padlock key. She had tried it on the Solomon Bright crate, and it had fit. She tried it on the second crate and the third. It fit both. She tried it on a small metal box she had not noticed before, set on the lowest shelf near the north wall, no more than 8 inches long. It fit this too. Inside the metal box, a folded document, several pages, in Mabel's handwriting. A complete inventory, more detailed than the notebook, with dimensions and condition notes and provenance, as best Mabel had been able to establish it. And at the back, in a separate section, a list of names and contact information under the heading, people to call if you need help. The third name on the list was Dr. Patricia Ames, Knoxville, Tennessee, with a phone number, and a note in Mabel's hand, knows her business. Honest. Helped me with the Parcel drawings in 2003. Trust her. She showed it to Ray. He looked at the name and nodded. I've heard Mabel mention her. She's an appraiser? She was a professor, I think. Retired. She did appraisals on the side, specialized in folk art. He paused. If Mabel trusted her, she's worth calling. She looked at the phone number Mabel had written next to Patricia Ames's name. It was an old number, without a prefix she recognized from current Knoxville area codes. Possibly landline. Possibly outdated. She took a photograph of the document with her phone and then, on the signal from Ray's hotspot, searched Patricia Ames Folk Art Appraiser Knoxville. 3 results. A university faculty page, retired, emeritus status, no longer maintained. A brief citation in a 2019 auction catalog crediting her as one of 4 authenticating scholars on a collection of Appalachian folk art that sold for $1.2 million at a specialized house in Nashville. And a current phone listing in Knoxville, different number from Mabel's note, but the same name. She wrote the new number in her own notebook. She put the document carefully back in the metal box. She put the metal box in her jacket pocket beside the composition notebook. They came up the stairs in the order they had gone down. Ray first with the lantern, then Owen, then Delia, each of them feeling the temperature rise with each step. The floorboards went back into place, nails reset, surface matching the surrounding floor. The cabin was lighter now, mid-morning sun through the intact window making a long rectangle on the pine floor. She stood in the cooking alcove and looked at the boards and then at the flat bar she had replaced against the wall. 47 pieces. Several $1 million, by rough estimate, by Owen's careful arithmetic. The names of artists who had been working in sheds and spare rooms and barns for their whole lives because they had to, because the work needed to exist, and who had died without knowing that what they made would end up in museums and auction catalogs and finally in a stone cellar in a Tennessee hollow where a retired schoolteacher had aired the cabin once a month for 5 years out of loyalty to a woman who had seen something worth keeping. She was going to call Patricia Ames in Knoxville today. She was going to bring an expert here, and the expert was going to tell her what she had, with specifics and numbers and the kind of authority that could not be argued with. And then she was going to figure out what came next. She picked up the deed copy from the floor where she had set it. Her name, 14.6 acres. One structure. Owen came to stand beside her. He was looking at the deed copy too. "We should tell Aunt Renee," he said. "Not yet." He nodded. He understood the difference between a secret and information that was not yet ready to be handled by the people who would handle it with the most fear. She walked to the front door and opened it. The clearing was the same as it had always been. The overgrown grass, the fence posts without wire, the bare oaks on the hillside. The creek was audible to the left. The sky was fully light now, no clouds, cold and clear, and as wide as it had seemed when she first stopped the car at the edge of the clearing 2 days before. She looked at Ray, who was coming up behind her. She was about to say something about calling Patricia Ames when she saw it. A black truck, parked on the ridge road above the property, maybe 200 yards out, barely visible through the bare tree line. Dark color, tinted windows. Engine idling, the exhaust faint in the cold air. She had seen it before. The first day. It had been there the first day, when she left after finding the cellar, and she had told herself it was a coincidence and believed it only partway. This was not a coincidence. She turned to Ray. He was looking at the ridge road. His face had changed. The careful, patient expression he had been carrying all morning was still there, but something behind it had shifted, the way the air shifted in the hours before a front came through. "Have you seen that truck before?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. The truck on the ridge road did not move. "Twice in the past month," he said, "when I came to check on the cabin. Both times it was gone before I got close enough to read the plate." She looked at the truck on the ridge. She looked at the cabin behind her, at the board she had just sealed, at the deed in her jacket pocket beside Mabel's inventory and Mabel's letter. She thought about 47 pieces in a cellar that the county had sold for $300 because nobody had known it was there. Somebody had known it was there. She could not yet say who. She could not say how long they had known, or what they wanted, or what they had been waiting for. She only knew that they had been watching when she first arrived, and they were watching now. She put her hand over the jacket pocket where the notebook and the inventory sat. Ray was still looking at the ridge road when the black truck slowly pulled out of sight behind the tree line and disappeared. The creek was running fast to the left. The bare oaks on the hillside stood without moving. Somewhere above them, a red-tailed hawk was circling, riding something up, going higher without any visible effort. "We need to move quickly," Delia said. Ray looked at her. "Whoever that is has been here twice in the past month and hasn't come to the door, which means they don't want me to know they're watching." She looked at the cabin. "That means they're waiting to see whether I know what I have." She looked at Owen. He had his paper notebook out, pen in hand, already writing. "Call Patricia Ames today," Ray said. It was not a suggestion. "Today," she said. She did it in the car, before she started the engine, while the clearing was still visible and the ridge road was empty. The number rang 4 times, and she was preparing for voicemail when a woman answered. The voice of someone in their 70s, alert and direct, the kind of voice that had been used for decades in classrooms and examination rooms and did not waste time. "Patricia Ames. My name is Delia Marsh. I bought a property in Cocke County at a county auction last week. I found a collection in it. I think it may have belonged to someone named Mabel Corwin, and her records list you as someone to contact." A pause on the other end. "Mabel Corwin. Yes." Another pause, longer. "She's been gone 3 years." "I know. And the collection is still there? Intact?" "Yes. In a cellar under the cabin. 47 pieces. I've opened about a dozen. Most are in very good condition." The woman on the other end was quiet for a moment that had a quality to it, the quiet of someone who had been waiting for a call they had not expected to receive. "I need to come see it," she said. "I've been wondering for 3 years what was going to happen to what Mabel built." They agreed on Friday morning. 2 days away. Patricia Ames would drive from Knoxville, 2.5 hours. Delia hung up and sat with the phone in her hand. Owen was watching her from the passenger seat. "She's coming. Friday." He wrote that down in the notebook. She started the car. She sat for a moment with the engine running and looked at the cabin one more time through the windshield. The chimney, the cracked window, the porch with its sagging corner. It looked the same as it had every time she had driven away from it, condemned and quiet and entirely ordinary from the outside. The ridge road above the property was empty. The exhaust had dispersed. The hawk was gone from the sky. She backed out of the clearing and drove the 3.2 miles back to the county road with Owen beside her and 47 pieces in the cellar behind her, and Patricia Ames coming on Friday, and something else, something she did not have a name for yet, moving in the hills around the property, like weather gathering from a direction she had not yet learned to read. The creak was still audible as she turned onto the county road. Then the cedars closed behind her, and the sound went away. She drove north toward Marrow with the notebook and the inventory and the deed and the 2 keys, and the knowledge that what Mabel Corwin had built in this hollow over 56 years was worth more than anyone in this county had imagined, and that she was not the only person who was beginning to understand that. The black truck was gone from the ridge, but the exhaust it had left in the cold air was still visible, a pale thread of white against the bare trees, dissolving slowly in the March wind. Patricia Ames drove a 2014 Volvo the color of old pewter, with a cracked rear bumper and a university faculty parking sticker on the back window that had not been current for 7 years. She pulled into the clearing at 9:40 on Friday morning, 2 hours and 20 minutes from Knoxville, which was the exact time she had estimated when she called Delia on Wednesday to confirm. She was 73 years old, compact and precise in her movements, wearing a barn coat over a gray turtleneck with a canvas tote bag over one shoulder that held, as Delia would discover, a set of magnifying lenses, a small portable UV light, a digital hygrometer, a set of cotton gloves in 3 sizes, a notebook with a worn leather cover, and a thermos of coffee she did not offer to share. She stood in the clearing for a moment and looked at the cabin the way a doctor looked at a patient, systematically, without expression, cataloging before concluding. "Chimney's intact," she said. It was not a question. Yes. Roof held enough to keep moisture out of the main room. Mostly. Some staining on the far rafter, but the floor's dry. She nodded, satisfied with the answer's specificity. She looked at the porch. Foundation piers. South corner's gone. The rest are holding. She picked her path across the porch boards the same careful way Delia and Ray did, testing each one, and Delia thought, she has done this before, walked into damaged places looking for things that mattered. Inside, Patricia set her tote on the wooden chair and pulled on a pair of cotton gloves. She looked at the fireplace, the tin cup, the walls, the ceiling, the general integrity of the space, all in about 90 seconds. Then she looked at Delia. "Show me the cellar." Ray was already there. He had arrived at 8 that morning with the propane lantern and his hotspot and 2 folding camp stools, practical provisions that Delia had not thought of and was grateful for. He went down the stairs first with the lantern, Patricia second, Delia third. Owen had stayed in the car with Cass, who Delia had finally brought that morning on the premise that there was something she needed to see, and who was sitting in the back seat drawing in her sketchbook with the specific concentration of a 6-year-old who had been told to stay put and intended to. The cellar looked different with 3 adults in it. Fuller, and in that fullness, more substantial, more real as a thing a person had actually built and filled over a working lifetime. Patricia stood in the center of the floor and did not speak for almost a full minute. She turned slowly, reading the shelving, the arrangement, the condition, the labels. Then she reached into her tote and pulled out the digital hygrometer and held it at arm's length and read the display. 51 degrees, 42% relative humidity, she said. Consistent with what you want for mixed media storage. She knew what she was doing. She moved to the north wall. The sexton pieces. You said 8. 8 packages on the second shelf. She lifted the nearest one and set it on the concrete floor and opened it with a care that was neither slow nor hurried, the specific pace of someone who had done this 10,000 times and had long since calibrated to the pace that the work required. She folded back the oilcloth. She looked at the painting for about 4 seconds without the magnifying lens, and then she picked it up and carried it toward the lantern light and looked at it for another 30 seconds. Then she said, in a tone that was genuinely flat, the tone of someone working very hard to stay professional. Where did she find him? Harlan County, Kentucky. The notebook says 1974. She paid $20 each. Patricia set the painting down and looked at the other 7 packages. I have authenticated 6 sexton pieces in my career, she said. All of them were discovered by individual collectors after 2009, after the Folk Art Museum retrospective. 3 were fakes that were passed off as originals. 2 were genuine but minor early works. She paused. I have never seen a group acquisition from direct artist contact. All of his known work was acquired secondhand. She picked up the painting again and turned it over, looking at the back. Mabel bought from him directly. That's extraordinary provenance. It changes everything about the authentication process. She set it down and began opening the second one. She went through all 8. She did not rush. She examined each painting under the portable UV light, which revealed the specific signature of Sexton's hand in the underdrawing, a characteristic she explained in precise terms that Delia tracked carefully, and Owen, on the stairs with his notebook, wrote down. She noted the condition of each. 7 of the 8 were in excellent to near excellent condition, the oilcloth and the cellar climate having done exactly what Mabel intended. The 8th had minor foxing in the lower left corner that would affect value, but not authenticity. For the 7 in excellent condition, Patricia said, setting the last one aside, I'm prepared to estimate an individual fair market value in the range of $160,000 to $220,000 each, based on current comparable sales and adjusted for the direct provenance. She paused. The 8th piece, with the condition issue, I'd estimate at $90,000 to $110,000. She let the numbers sit in the cold air of the cellar for a moment. Then she moved to the Solomon Bright crates. She worked through the morning, systematic, unhurried, occasionally making notes in the worn leather book, occasionally asking Delia questions about Mabel's notebook entries that Delia answered by pulling out the composition book and reading directly from it. The Solomon Bright carvings drew her longest attention, partly because the figural work required examination from multiple angles and partly, Delia thought, because Patricia appeared to find them genuinely extraordinary beyond the professional assessment. She held the seated woman figure, the one with her hands open and her face turned upward, for almost 2 full minutes without speaking. He carved from 1920 to 1975, she said finally. 55 years. Most of it unknown outside of Sevier County. What the museums hold now came from estate sales after his death. His family didn't know what they had. She set the figure carefully back in its cloth padding. These 6 pieces are from his middle period, 1963 to 1971. The period his secondary market is strongest in. She cited 2 comparable sales, gave Delia the numbers, wrote them in her own notebook. The Eunice Tuttle drawings in the cylindrical rolls produced a different kind of response, quieter and more considered. Patricia read through the full set of drawings from the first roll spread carefully on the concrete floor, then from the second, moving from sheet to sheet in a pattern that covered the sequence without overlapping or creasing. She took her time with each one. She asked for the notebook entry. She looked at the dates. She has 17 Tuttle drawings here, she said. Not 14. I'm counting 17 in the 2 rolls. She made a note. The 2023 auction sold 14 for $420,000. 14 pieces, mixed period. These 17 are all concentrated in a 3-year window, 1977 to 1979. That kind of period consistency is unusual in her known work and will be of significant interest to collectors and institutions. She rolled the drawings back carefully, one at a time. I'll need to do more detailed research on the Tuttle before I give you a final number. The wooden crates along the south wall. 3 more after the bright crates. One held ceramic figures labeled in Mabel's notebook under names Patricia partially recognized from regional folk art surveys and partially did not. She noted each piece carefully. Another held flat works on paper, mixed media, for artists. The 3rd crate held the Coleman Hale painting. Mabel's notebook entry for August 3, 2001 had described it as the best thing she had found in 10 years and had used the word exceptional twice, which was the only time she had repeated herself in 38 years of careful documentation. It was rolled, not framed. Rolled on a cardboard tube and wrapped in acid-free tissue paper inside the oilcloth, an extra layer of protection she had given no other piece. 36 inches by 48, oil and commercial house paint on canvas, the canvas itself of evident age. Patricia unrolled it on the floor with Ray's help, each of them holding one end, spreading it flat, the edges weighted with water bottles from the camp stools. A landscape, Tennessee hill country in late summer, the sky the weight of August heat, the colors of drought grass and dry oak, and the specific amber that belonged to a late afternoon in a dry year. Figures in the middle distance, indistinct but present, The way figures were present in a crowd seen from a ridge, individual without being individual. In the foreground, close and physical, a stretch of red clay road disappearing into the lower right corner of the canvas. The road itself rendered in a way that made you feel the dust and the heat radiating from it. That made your feet remember what that kind of road felt like in August. It was the largest thing in the cellar, and it filled the available floor space, and it was the best thing Delia had ever seen in her life. Better than the Sexton paintings, better than the bright carvings, better than anything she had encountered in a gallery or a museum or a book, because it was not performing for anyone. It was not trying to be art. It was simply a man who had looked at his own landscape for 60 years and had finally found a way to say exactly what he needed to say about it. Patricia Ames was very still. She crouched at the edge of the painting and looked at it without the magnifying lens. Then with it, she turned on the UV light and moved it slowly across the surface. She looked at the back of the canvas, which Mabel's notebook said bore the notation C.H. August 1981 in the artist's hand. She stood up. She looked at the painting for another full moment. Coleman Hale painted 9 large-format canvases in his career, she said. 7 are in documented collections. 1 was destroyed in a house fire in 1994. The 9th has been listed as missing since his estate was catalogued in 2001. She looked at Delia. The missing one was described in his estate records as a landscape, large format, oil on canvas, completed 1981, last known location Grundy County. She looked back at the painting on the floor. This is it. The cellar was quiet. What is it worth? Delia said. For a Hale of this size and period, comparable sales suggest $400,000 to $500,000. But the missing canvas status, the documentation from his estate, and the quality of what I'm looking at here would place it above comparable. She paused. I would estimate $650,000 to $800,000. The number sat between them in the cold air. Ray was holding the lantern and looking at the painting on the floor with the expression of a man who was revising everything he thought he had known about the years he spent coming to this cabin. They came upstairs at 12:30, blinking in the noon light coming through the intact window. Patricia sat at the table in the cooking alcove with her leather notebook open and her tote bag beside her and wrote for 22 minutes while Delia stood at the fireplace and Ray made tea on a camp stove he had brought in his truck. Owen came in from the car where he had been reading to Cass. He looked at Patricia's face and then at Delia and asked with his eyes whether it was what they thought it was. Delia nodded. Owen sat down at the table with his own notebook and waited. Patricia finished writing. She looked at what she had written and made one correction and looked again. Then she closed the notebook and set it on the table. 47 documented pieces, she said. 39 authenticated by me on-site today, 8 requiring additional research. For the 39 authenticated pieces, my preliminary estimate of aggregate fair market value is $4,700,000 to $5,400,000. She looked at Delia. For the 8 pending pieces, I'll need 2 to 3 weeks. But my working estimate for the full collection is $5.2 to $6 million. Delia put her hand flat on the table. She was not crying. She did not feel like crying. What she felt was something more specific and harder to categorize. Something like the feeling she had had when the gavel came down at the auction, when the clerk said sold, and she had walked out of the courthouse with a manila folder under her arm and stood in the cold March air and tried to understand what had just happened to her. The same specific gap between the understanding that something was real and the ability to feel it as real. $6 million. Ray poured tea without speaking. He set a cup in front of Patricia, one in front of Delia, one in front of Owen, who looked at the cup and then at the number in his notebook and then out the window at the clearing. She knew, Owen said. They all looked at him. Mabel. She knew what it was worth. She didn't say it, but she knew. He paused, with the particular certainty of a 10-year-old who had thought it through. She didn't want it to go to a museum or a big collector because they would have taken credit for discovering it. She wanted someone specific to find it, someone who would actually need it. He looked at Delia. She set it up so that someone like you would find it. No one responded to this for a moment, because there was nothing to add to it. Then they heard a car in the clearing. Not Ray's truck, which was already there. A gray sedan, late model, the kind that was designed to look like a personal vehicle and managed only to look like it was trying to. It parked at the edge of the clearing near the lane. One person got out, a man in his 40s in a dark jacket, holding a leather portfolio. He walked to the cabin without hurrying. He had the specific bearing of someone accustomed to delivering unwelcome information in settings where he was not welcome. Delia went to the door before he knocked. He introduced himself as Garrett Yates, attorney, representing the Corwin family trust out of Memphis, Tennessee. His voice was practiced and even, the voice of a man who had delivered this particular speech before and had refined it down to the words that caused the least argument while leaving the least room for it. A distant relative of Mabel Corwin's, a man named Douglas Rains, had come forward following her death. His attorneys had established a family connection through Mabel's maternal line, a second cousin twice removed. A will had been identified, predating the most recent county records, in which Mabel had intended to leave the property to family. The county auction had proceeded in error. Mr. Rains was prepared to be reasonable, Yates said, meaning the word reasonable as a container for something specific. He was not seeking to contest Delia's deed through lengthy litigation. He was prepared to offer her a settlement, a sum representing her bid amount plus reasonable compensation, in exchange for a clean transfer of the property back to the trust. He paused after this and looked at her with the expectant patience of someone who had learned that most people needed a moment before they folded. Delia looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Give me your contact information." He produced a card from the portfolio. She photographed it with her phone. She photographed the document he held, which he had not offered to her, but also had not pulled away when she raised her phone to it. She read the document from her position at the door, quickly and carefully, which was a skill she had developed over 8 years of reviewing hospital records. The will was dated 2014. Mabel Corwin had died in 2022. She had moved to the assisted living facility in 2021. The notebook Delia held in her jacket pocket was dated up to 2019, indicating Mabel had been fully cognitively present and deliberately managing her affairs until at least that year. A will from 2014 was not inherently invalid, but the specific claim that Mabel had intended to leave the property to family was directly contradicted by the letter she had written in 2019, which was still in Delia's jacket pocket. She looked at Yates. The property transferred to the county when Mabel died without a recorded heir, and the county disposed of it legally at public auction, she said. My deed is recorded. If Mr. Rains has a claim to the estate, he should have filed it during the probate period, which was 3 years ago. She paused. You're welcome to contact me through my attorney. He blinked. He had not expected the word attorney. Of course, he said. His voice had not changed, but something behind it had. We'll be in touch. He walked back to the gray sedan and drove away. Patricia was standing in the cabin doorway behind Delia. She watched the sedan until it was out of sight on the gravel lane and then said, in a tone that had nothing professional about it, "Good." Ray was less restrained. He said something under his breath in a language Delia did not recognize and then said, in English, "Douglas Rains. I should have guessed." She turned. You know him? Not personally, but I know who he is. He set his tea down on the table. About 6 years ago, there was a man going around to the county recorders in this part of the state, looking up properties with lapsed taxes or unclear title, buying up claims for almost nothing, then flipping the legal confusion into settlements from whoever actually held the deed. I heard about it from a neighbor who got caught up in something similar. He looked at the lane where the sedan had gone. He would have had to know about the collection to know this property was worth a fight. She thought about the black truck on the Ridge Road, the twice-monthly visits Ray had seen. How long do you think he's known? Long enough to set up a trust. Long enough to find a will. He was quiet for a moment. Mabel consulted with someone at the Tennessee Art Museum in 2018. She went in person. She wanted to know what the process for a donation would look like. She didn't proceed, but she had the conversation. He paused. That's my best guess about how the word got out. She looked at Owen. Owen looked at his notebook, where he had been writing through the entire conversation with Yates, his handwriting steady. He's been watching the property since the auction, Owen said. He knows we found the seller because we've been coming here. He sent Yates today because the appraisal car is in the clearing and he knows the clock is moving. The logic of this was clean and correct. Yates had been sent because Rains knew the collection was being evaluated, which meant time was running out to make a claim before Delia had the resources and the documentation to fight one. She called Candace Shore that afternoon from the clearing, standing in the cold with the cabin visible behind her. Ray had given her the number. Candace was 48, practiced estate and property law out of Newport, and took the call on the second ring. Delia explained the sequence: the auction, the deed, the collection, the appraisal, the visit from Yates. She described the 2014 will and the 2019 letter from Mabel in her own words. Candace listened without interrupting. When Delia finished, she was quiet for 3 seconds, the professional quiet of someone doing rapid evaluation. "Send me everything you have," she said. "Deed copy, auction confirmation, the letter, photographs of the will document Yates showed you. I'll need 48 hours. She paused. "Contingency basis. If you win, I take 15% of the settlement or judgment. If you don't win, you owe me nothing." She did not ask about the appraised value of the collection. She would have understood from the word appraisal that the contingency was worth her time. The 48 hours were the longest Delia had spent since the 22 nights in the car. She told Renee that evening. All of it. The seller, the collection, the appraiser, the number Patricia had written in her notebook, the attorney who had come to the clearing. She sat at the kitchen table where she had found the goldenrod notice 2 weeks before and told her sister the whole sequence, while Carl sat at the end of the table with his hands around a coffee mug, and she watched Renee's face move through the expressions in the order they came. Disbelief, then calculation, then something closer to grief, then finally a look Delia had not seen on her sister's face in years. $300, Renee said. $300. Renee looked at Carl. Carl looked at his coffee mug. "And the man in the suit," Renee said. "At the auction. The one who laughed. He works in real estate. He looked at the parcel and made the rational decision. And you made the other one." "Yes." Renee was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in a different tone, one Delia recognized from childhood, the tone Renee used when she was making an admission at some cost to herself. "I told Carl you'd lost your mind. When you called from the courthouse." She looked at Delia. "I'm sorry for that." Delia shook her head. "You were working with the information you had. I was working with what I was afraid of. That's different." She looked at the table between them, at the coffee mug and the space where the goldenrod notice had sat 2 weeks before. "You sat at this table at 4 in the morning and you found a piece of paper that said $300 and 14 acres, and you had $319 and 2 children and a cot in my laundry room." She paused. "I would have told myself it was too risky. I would have put it back in the box." Delia looked at her sister. They had grown up in this kitchen, at this table, under this buzzing light. "I didn't have anything left to risk," she said. "That's different from being brave." Renee shook her head slowly, the shake of someone who was not going to let that distinction stand. "It's not, Dee. It really isn't." Carl said nothing. He looked at his coffee mug for a while, and then he got up and refilled it, and said, on his way back to his chair, "Let me know if there's anything I can do." He meant it. Delia could tell he meant it. Candace Shore called at 7:30 Wednesday morning, 6 days after the visit from Yates. "The Corwin family trust was registered in Shelby County 8 months ago," she said. "The supposed distant relative, Douglas Raines, has no documented connection to Mabel Corwin's family in any county record, birth record, census record, or genealogical database I can find. The 2014 will has formatting inconsistencies with Tennessee's statutory requirements, and the notary stamp belongs to a notary who died in 2019 and whose records I've requested." She paused for the space of one breath. "His claim is fraudulent. The deed is yours. I'm filing a motion to dismiss any pending challenge and a formal complaint with the state bar regarding Yates's conduct." Delia was sitting in her car in the parking lot of the Marrow grocery store, where she had worked her 16 hours a week for the past 3 months. She listened to this and said, "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Candace said. "It's clean, but it takes time." It took 3 weeks. At the end of those 3 weeks, Douglas Raines withdrew his claim without formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing, which Candace said was typical. Yates resigned from the case. The complaint with the state bar was received and pending. The legal challenge was over. Patricia Ames submitted her formal written appraisal on April 12th. The document was 14 pages, single-spaced, with individual assessments of all 47 pieces, authentication methodology, comparable market sales, and a final aggregate estimate for $1,930,000 for 42 fully authenticated pieces, with 5 pieces noted as requiring specialist review before final valuation. Her working estimate for the 5 pending pieces added another $280,000 to $400,000 to the total. The likely full collection value, $5.2 to $5.3 million. The number was printed on white paper in a 12-point font that gave it no particular weight. It was just a number on a page. But it was also the cabin and the land and the cellar and the oilcloth and the cotton cord and Mabel Corwin driving to Harlan County in August of 1974 with enough money for a tank of gas and $20 per painting and the specific kind of sight that could see what something was before anyone else had told her what it was worth. She called the auction house in Nashville that Patricia had recommended, a specialized house that handled folk and outsider art with an established collector base. She spoke with a woman named Helen Drummond who had worked with Patricia before and who asked, after reviewing the appraisal summary, whether Delia wanted to proceed with an initial sale of select pieces. The initial auction, she explained, would establish market price for the Sexton and Hale pieces and generate the kind of attention that would strengthen pricing for subsequent sales. Delia asked 2 questions. The first was about the process for including biographical information on the artists in the auction catalog. Helen said it was standard practice to include provenance notes, and she could expand these as much as Delia wanted. The second question was whether the auction house could help locate surviving family members of the artists before the sale. Helen said she had done it before and would try. They scheduled the first sale for September. In the weeks between the legal resolution and the auction, she brought Cass to the cabin for the first time. It was a Saturday morning, May, the clearing grown green and the creek audible and louder with spring runoff. Cass climbed out of the car with Button under her arm and looked at the cabin for a moment, the tilted porch corner and the cracked window and the stone chimney. And then she walked straight to the front door the way 6-year-olds walk toward things that interested them, without the adult habit of preparing for disappointment. Delia unlocked the door and let her in. Cass walked through the main room slowly, touching things with her free hand. The stone of the fireplace, the surface of the log walls, the edge of the wooden chair with its canvas draped over it. She stood at the intact window and looked out at the clearing and the hillside and the bare ridgeline above it. She went into the bedroom and stood at the iron bed frame and looked at it for a moment and then came back out. She stopped in front of the fireplace. "Mama," she said. Someone already lit the fire. Delia looked at her daughter and then at the fireplace, at the cold ash and the tin cup on the mantle, at the hearth Mabel had stood in front of on winter mornings for 40 years. She looked at the cup, which had sat on that mantle since she first found it, which she had not moved in all the time she had been back. "Yes," she said. "A long time ago. A woman named Mabel." Cass considered this with the seriousness she brought to all new information. "Is she gone now?" "Yes, baby." Cass looked at the fireplace for another moment. Then she turned to Delia with the direct, clear expression of someone who had made up their mind. "We should keep it going for her," she said. The auction was in September and ran 2 days. There were 43 registered bidders for the Sexton pieces. Some were institutions, 3 museums, and a university collection that had been following Sexton scholarship since the 2009 retrospective. Some were private collectors whose names Helen listed for Delia the morning of the sale, names she did not recognize, people from cities she had never visited, people with the specific kind of money that allowed you to spend $200,000 on a painting for reasons that had nothing to do with investment and everything to do with wanting to own a true thing. The Sexton collection sold on the first day. 7 of the 8 paintings, the one with Foxing held back for a second sale, sold individually over 4 hours in the afternoon session. The bidding opened at Patricia's conservative estimate for each piece and exceeded it on every one. The Mountain Pass painting, the first one Delia had unwrapped in the cellar, sold for $214,000 to a buyer representing a regional museum that had been trying to acquire Sexton work for 6 years. The 7 pieces together realized $1,340,000. The Coleman Hale painting sold the following morning. Helen had identified it in the catalog as the missing Grundy County canvas, documented in Hale's estate records, and the catalog note was 6 paragraphs rather than 2, because the story of its discovery was part of what the bidders were acquiring. It sold for $760,000 to a private collector from Atlanta who outbid 3 museums in the final 7 minutes of the session. The first auction, 7 Sextons and the Hale, brought in just over $2 million. Helen called with the final figure that evening. Delia was sitting on the porch of Renee's house, the same house she had been sleeping in as a laundry room guest for 2 months, when she found the goldenrod notice. Owen was beside her on the step, his notebook in his lap. She said thank you and hung up and sat for a moment. How much? Owen said. She told him. He wrote it in the notebook. He looked at it for a moment, then looked at the street in front of the house, the ordinary Marrow street with its ordinary Tuesday evening and its porch lights coming on as the sky went dark. Okay, he said. It was what he had said when she told him about the auction, when she told him about the deed, when she told him about the seller. It was his word for, I understand the magnitude of this, and I am choosing to treat it like something real rather than something that will disappear. She paid everything she owed. The dental office job, she gave 2 weeks' notice on a Tuesday morning, and the woman at the front desk said she was sorry to lose her in a tone that was genuinely sorry, and Delia thanked her and meant it. The child support arrears from Derek, which she did not need anymore, but had Candace continue pursuing on principle, because a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old deserved to know that someone thought their time and care had value. The outstanding medical bills, 3 of them, from the year after Derek left, that she had been making $10 monthly payments on. She paid them in full in one morning and had the receipts emailed to her phone. She put money in accounts for Owen and Cass, the kind of accounts that were meant for education. That would be there in 8 years for Owen and 12 years for Cass regardless of what happened between now and then. She bought a 2019 Ford F-150 with 42,000 miles on it. White, reliable, with a backseat large enough for both children and their things. She enrolled Cass in a school closer to the cabin for the following year and put Owen's name on the waiting list for a magnet program in Newport that taught applied mathematics alongside standard coursework, which was the school Owen had asked about once and then never asked about again, because he was old enough to understand that asking for things you couldn't have served no purpose. She called to give him the news, and he went quiet on the phone in his specific way, the way he went quiet when something landed that he had trained himself not to want. You don't have to go if you don't want to, she said. He said, I want to. She also gave Ray Childress a check. He did not ask for it, and she did not explain it at length. She said, 5 years of coming up that road every month to take care of something that mattered, and Mabel wasn't here to pay you, so I am. He looked at the check and looked at her and said he didn't feel right about it, and she said she didn't feel right about the alternative, and he folded it and put it in his shirt pocket and did not say anything more about it. The cabin took 4 months to make properly habitable. She hired a crew through a contractor Ray knew in Newport, and she worked alongside them. And Owen worked alongside her on weekends and after school, learning the difference between a load-bearing wall and a partition, learning how to run a bead of caulk, learning what subfloor deflection looked like and how to correct it. She learned things too. How to read a structural drawing. How to talk to subcontractors in the language they responded to, which was specificity and follow-through. How to make a decision about a building the way she had made decisions about engine systems, by understanding what was mechanical and what was structural and what was purely cosmetic, and addressing them in that order. The foundation piers were replaced. The roof was replaced entirely with standing seam metal in the same color the original had been before it faded, a red that looked right against the surrounding hills. New septic system, properly engineered. New plumbing roughed in and finished. A proper bathroom where Mabel's bedroom had been and a small addition off the back for a second bedroom. New electrical run from the county road with a weatherhead and panel, service size for the structure they had now and the additions they might want later. A wood stove added to the kitchen alcove where the outline of the old one was still visible on the wall, a cast iron unit from a manufacturer in Vermont that Ray had helped her choose. The log walls they left alone. They needed repointing in places, which she learned to do herself with a mix Ray helped her choose, and the logs themselves were sound, 100 years old and still holding, the kind of material that lasted when it was given the chance. She left the tool marks visible where the original builder had worked the wood, and the worn smooth path from the front door to the fireplace where Mabel's feet had gone the same route through 40 winters, because those marks were part of what the cabin was, and erasing them would have been wrong. The cellar she did not touch except to check on it monthly, the way Ray had. The temperature stayed consistent. The remaining pieces on the shelving stayed wrapped. The stone walls held. She moved in on a Thursday in November, 2 days before Thanksgiving. She moved in with Owen and Cass and a used couch and the children's beds and a kitchen table she bought at an estate sale in Hartford and a set of dishes that had been Renee's mother's, and that Renee had pressed on her with the specific insistence of someone trying to give back what she hadn't known how to give at the right time. The first night, she built a fire. She used dry white oak from the cord Ray had left stacked at the side of the house. The good split wood that caught fast and burned long and filled the firebox with a warmth that moved through the main room in a way that the electric heat in the mobile home on Whitfield Road had never managed, a warmth that had direction and character, that was different near the hearth than it was at the back wall. That changed as the fire changed. Cass sat on the floor in front of the hearth with Button, watching the fire with the focused attention she brought to things that were new and real. Owen sat at the table with a book, close enough to the warmth to read by it. Delia sat in the wooden chair, the one that had been there when she first came, the canvas still folded over it, and she looked at the fire and at her children and at the walls of the cabin that were theirs now in the way that something was yours when you had put work into it and lived in it and given it some of yourself. She thought about Mabel. She thought about her driving these roads before the county paved most of them, before GPS existed to get her through hollows and up dirt tracks to farmhouses and workshops where people were making things that would outlast everyone who was living then. She thought about Mabel sitting in someone's kitchen in Harlan County in August 1974 and looking at paintings stacked against a wall and understanding what she was looking at when no one else in the world had thought to look. She thought about the 38 years of driving and the 47 acquisitions and the $730 and the cellar built with care to hold it all, the oilcloth and the cotton cord and the composition notebook with its small, neat handwriting, the whole long, patient project of preserving something true. Helen Drummond had found families for 7 of the artists before the first sale. 4 of them were alive. 3 were children or grandchildren of artists who had died without knowing their work was in a cellar in Tennessee. Delia had spoken to each of them before the auction and told them what had been kept and what it would bring and where it was going. 2 of the living artists had wept. One had laughed, a long single laugh of disbelief that she heard through the phone and recognized. One had said, "I made that piece the summer my daughter was born. I thought I gave it away." He meant it as a plain fact, not a complaint. He had given it away to a woman who paid him $40 for it in 1988 and had kept it in a stone cellar for 33 years in exactly the condition it was made in. She set aside 5% of the auction proceeds, from the first sale and from every subsequent one, for a fund administered through a community arts organization in Newport. She named it for Mabel. The fund provided small acquisition grants to regional artists and supported an archiving project documenting folk and outsider art still held in private hands across the 7 surrounding counties. Patricia agreed to chair the advisory committee, citing it as something she had wanted to exist for 30 years and had never found anyone willing to actually create. The catalog had run the biographies at full length, as Delia had asked. Each piece included the artist's name, birthplace, working period, and 3 sentences about their life and the circumstance of the work. For the artists whose families had been found, the families had reviewed and approved the text. For the ones whose histories Delia and Patricia had reconstructed from county records and library archives and the occasional newspaper clipping, the text said, "All available information suggests," and then what was true. The second auction was scheduled for spring. The remaining sexton pieces, the Tuttle drawings, the bright carvings, and 9 other pieces. Patricia had finished authenticating. Helen estimated proceeds between $1.4 and $1.8 million. The 5 pending pieces were still being researched. Patricia believed one of them, a large charcoal drawing by the artist whose initials were M.W., and whose work had produced no results in any database, might be the most important discovery of the entire collection, because work that had left no trace in any record at all was either nothing or it was something that the existing record had never known to look for. She had written to 3 scholars of Appalachian folk art asking if they could identify M.W. from the style alone. 2 had written back with questions. None had an answer yet. Delia had put the M.W. drawing in its pouch and put the pouch back on the shelf in the cellar and locked it. Some things could wait. The fire in the main room had settled into steady coals by 9 o'clock. Cass had fallen asleep on the couch with Button, one socked foot sticking out from under the blanket. Owen had closed his book and was looking at the ceiling, at the exposed rafters and the underside of the metal roof above them. The structure he had watched be replaced board by board over the past 4 months. She built something, he said. Mabel. She built it alone, and it took her whole life, and nobody knew about it. He was quiet for a moment. But she knew what she was building. Delia looked at the fire. She knew, she said. She thought about what Owen had said in the cellar on the day of the appraisal, the observation he had made about Mabel setting it up so that someone like Delia would find it. She had been turning it over since then, in the car on the long drives and in the evenings at Renee's house, and during the work weeks at the cabin when the crew was in and the sound of hammers filled the clearing. She was not sure she believed it was that deliberate, that Mabel had somehow designed the chain of events that led to a woman with $300.19 to spare finding a goldenrod notice in a cardboard box at 4 in the morning. That was the kind of thinking that made the world tidier than it was. But she believed something adjacent to it. She believed that Mabel had understood, in the way of someone who had spent her whole life paying close attention to things the world had overlooked, that the right person would be someone who had run out of other options, someone for whom $300 was not trivial and not a test, but actually everything. Not someone looking for an investment or a project or a tax benefit. Someone who needed it the way you needed air. And the county auction, the starting bid set at $300, the cash-only policy, the Friday that the notice arrived in a laundry room in Marrow, none of that was Mabel's doing. But Mabel had made something worth finding. She had made it well enough to last until the right person came along. Outside, the November wind moved through the cedar trees along the gravel lane and moved across the clearing and found its way around the corners of the cabin and pressed against the new insulation and the old log walls and did not get through. The creek to the left was loud with autumn rain, running fast in the dark. On the ridge above the property, nothing moved. No black truck. No exhaust in the cold air. Just the ridge and the oaks and the sky past them, clear and dark and full. The fire held. The cabin held. The land was theirs. Cass made a small sound in her sleep and pulled the blanket tighter. Owen reached over and tucked the edge of it under her feet without being asked. Delia looked at her children in the warm light of the fire and thought about Mabel's letter, the part she had read a dozen times since finding it, the part that said, "I only ask one thing. Remember them by name when you tell people where these things came from." She had remembered them. She would keep remembering them. Every artist's name, every piece, every $40 and every $20 and every $4 paid directly into the hands of someone who had made something real. That was what Mabel had wanted. Not credit, not a monument, not her own name on anything. Just the names of the people she had found, carried forward into the world that had not known to look for them. Delia was going to make sure they were carried. She put another piece of oak on the fire, the split wood catching immediately, the flame going from low orange to bright, the warmth moving across the room and touching the log walls and the ceiling and the faces of her sleeping daughter and her watching son and the tin cup that still sat on the stone mantle, exactly where she had found it. The fire Mabel had lit in this hollow, in all the hollows and counties she had driven through over 56 years, was still burning. It was theirs to keep burning now. Stories like this remind us that starting over is terrifying, but it is always possible. If you or someone you love is facing a total reset right now, whether from a divorce, a loss, or a financial disaster, you need a plan. Scan the QR code on your screen or click the link below to get the Phoenix Blueprint for just $17. It gives you the exact steps you need to take in the first 48 hours and a 90-day plan to get your independence back. Thank you for watching.